This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 342, Acquia Code Studio. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking about Acquia Code Studio with Matthew Grasmick and Ron Northcutt. Matthew is a longtime Drupalist and an Acquian. An engineer at heart, Matthew is Acquia's Senior Director for Acquia's developer experience and Drupal acceleration teams. Ron has also been involved with Drupal for a long time, since 4.6, and has been an Acquian for over 7 years. Ron is a jack of all trades and currently working as the Director of Developer Advocacy at Acquia. Matthew and Ron, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Also joining us, as usual, John Picozzi. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
And joining us for his third episode is Michael Anello. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me back, despite last week.
It's worth noting that Mike's coming in live from Dev Days.
Very lucky to be here. Fantastic event.
Good stuff.
So this week we do have a new module of the week. So if you're a member of the Talking Drupal Slack channel, you might have seen this. So Matthew Scarset posted earlier today or yesterday that he had worked on a new module for calendaring. And it's a small, simple module called Calendar View. It's meant to be very fast, very quick. Not unlike other modules of the week. I don't think anybody on this podcast has actually used it, but Matthew he's been on the show before to talk about some of his modules. He always writes, really short, simple utility modules to kind of solve one use case. And it was one of the reasons why I brought it up is because we just had a show on Smart Date 3 weeks ago, I think, episode 339, I think. And Martin was talking with Matthew about how to integrate with Smart Date. So if you're using Smart Date, you can expect Calendar View to work with that fairly shortly, I think. And it is described as a lightweight module to display any view's results in a calendar table. It's compatible with any view, and it should respect exposed date filters. So it should be pretty cool.
What do you mean by it's compatible with any view? I mean, are there some style plugins that aren't compatible with some views?
So I think it probably is talking about the different kind of types of views that you can have, maybe.
Like the different displays.
Like the different displays, yeah.
All right. I mean, it seems interesting. I'm not a huge fan of calendar displays, just in general on websites. I think the vast majority of websites just, need like a list of events, unless you have a ton of events. This is interesting because it doesn't use any external libraries to render the calendar. That's what I thought was interesting about this. It's all kind of just, there's some HTML there. I checked out the code. There's a little bit of CSS. There's no JavaScript. It seems very lean, very lightweight, very straightforward and simple, as you alluded to, Nick. So I think it probably has a home.
Have you guys used the older calendar module, like back in D7?
I think everyone has.
Yes.
It's the monster one, the one with like all the tentacles.
Yeah, pretty finicky, very complicated. I've used full calendar quite a bit because it was easier than recent. So I'm very interested in this being lightweight. I actually added it to my list here. But it looks good.
Let us know once you've used it and we'll report back. But yeah, I mean, I've actually gotten to the point where I generally am able to talk clients out of having a calendar because they're so, there's such a bad. But
this could change that.
I'd be interested to know how it works responsively, because that's always where calendars, for me, start falling apart.
Yeah, I think that, and when clients add more than a couple of events per day, those
Yeah.
days or weeks end up blowing up. So, but if you have a lot more flexibility on the view side, then you have a lot more ability to kind of restrict that and make sure it's a little bit cleaner.
I mean, but
So, yeah,
some of those things aren't like a module maintainer's responsibility, right? It's like the UX person on the front end who's, writing some CSS to make sure like they're displaying better. Like, I mean, as long as the standard markup is there for the calendar, right? Like you can add some CSS to make it look better and respond better if it doesn't, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I completely agree with that. I think there's a certain expectation that when you install a Drupal module that has its own template file and CSS, that you're going to get some minimum level of responsiveness out of the box.
Sure.
Yeah,
I think that's
I was
reasonable.
wondering whether to even go down this rabbit hole. It's because it's a big
No.
rabbit hole. But one thing that's lacking in Drupal is good user experience out of the box across the board. Claro helps with that. Allegro is going to help with that. But the problem really arises from when you add modules, and everything requires a front-end developer coming in and making it usable. It increases the effort to launch any Drupal site. So it's one of the things we have going against us compared to other frameworks.
I think another thing too, in this particular case, one of the problems is, Google Calendar. It's one of those things where it's a really, really complex problem to solve in the user experience space. And then there's just a ubiquitous example of it done fairly well with Google Calendar. It's like, I call it like the Facebook effect too. Like there's some things that Facebook did originally with images that were like when they first started allowing those in 2009, 2010, that were just very, very difficult to handle. And because people like, hey, Facebook does it, they just expect the ability to like have crop and focal point, inline editing of images. And it's like, you realize that there's a multi-billion-dollar corporation behind this experience that has a whole team dedicated to it. And if you can get something like this, that's utility, that's clean markup and easier to modify, then that's a win for the community.
I think Nick just solved it. We should all embed Google calendars as opposed to building our own.
I've done that. That's one case where it's not a great experience.
That's my favorite line. My favorite line in any client request is, "It should be easy. I've seen it on Facebook."
Yeah.
I've never gotten that comment, but I would be kind of
flabbergasted
if
I just
did.
shred those RFPs like, oh, yep.
Yeah. The one that sticks out to me is when you start typing a URL when you're making a post, and it pops up with the little preview of the site that you're typing in. It's like, oh well, Facebook does it, so how And again, Nick had it exactly right. It's you have to remind your client that, well, they are a multi-billion-dollar company with thousands of developers. You have hired me or me and these people.
To be fair though, that is the kind of thing, if I didn't know better, I would expect someone would have done something like that for Drupal, and it would be cool if they had. So I wouldn't expect it to be like, oh yeah, that's easy. I would expect like, well, there's a module for that, right? Because there's like,
can't you pull in that
modules.
JS library?
Yeah, isn't that a module? But I've looked for that feature many times and I've never found it. So I guess there isn't a module. Maybe somebody listening can make it. That'd be cool.
I'm tempted to make it now that we're talking about it. It's very hard for me not to start writing it while I'm on this podcast. But
put it on your list, Matt. Matt is serially addicted to writing code, which is
borderline rude.
It can be really helpful if you're working on a project and he's like, oh, no, that's pretty easy. Here, let me show you. And then all of a sudden he like fixes it for you. It's like, wow, thanks, man. That was helpful.
That's funny because I was at the presentation on like the status of all the Drupal 10 initiatives, and they all have plenty of work for you. Let's get those knocked out, Matthew.
The POC for Project Browser. I wrote the POC for Project Browser.
Actually,
you saw in the trees note. That was me. So.
Okay.
And that was not even being a JavaScript developer. And he did the JavaScript thing using Svelte, which made me a much
built on Svelte, right?
Yeah, which made me a much bigger believer. I was going to get to it. I just didn't have time. Matt like had a free afternoon and was like, this looks easy enough. and made me a big believer in the power of Svelte specifically with Drupal, because you make those components and you can put them together. And I have a mad scientist idea about trying to do more of that later, but we'll see.
Ron mentioned, he was like, you should check out Svelte. I was like, yeah, I'll check it out. And then over the weekend, I like took the tutorials, learned it, wrote the POC. It's like, hey, look, this is written in Svelte. Let's go.
Yeah.
Actually, amazingly easy. It's fun. So we could talk about that too if you want. Project Browser.
Yeah. We did have a show on that, I think episode 304, but it'll be in the show notes as well. But yeah, I'd love to have a show about Svelte as well. It's come up a few times in my research for clients for certain things. So I'd love to have a deeper discussion about that.
I just want you guys to keep saying Svelte. It's like the funniest
Svelte.
word.
Svelte.
Like,
yeah.
Well, of course I am.
Yes. Well, just so you know, one of the things on my list, maybe this quarter, if I get to it, is to actually do. There's a module called Component Singular that I made. It makes it easy to add JavaScript components just using a YAML file. And I want to do an extension of that as another module that allows you to import components using that mechanism. And the next step after that would be to put the Svelte, what is it called? REPL.
Yeah.
Kind of overlaid on top, which I know a lot of people don't like, but so that you could actually potentially create your own independent components, no other dependencies like a framework like React or something, and then it generates the JavaScript and outputs to the file system for you.
You might actually, so this show is intersecting the Talking Drupal Slack channel a little bit more than usual, but somebody actually just posted this afternoon or this morning actually an integration. Is Matthew Aguilo, I think his name is. He posted something he's built a couple of custom component library modules to better integrate components from something like Storybook.
Nice.
I haven't finished listening to the whole video. I just started watching it this morning, and then I had a meeting. But it looks like he built a couple of specific Drupal modules that are similar to the components module, but don't depend. I think the big bonus there, and I just got to this part in the video, so I can't speak to it, but I think the big bonus is his module doesn't use the Twig.js library.
Neither does this one. This just does, it just uses a YAML file to just import, and then it has whatever HTML you provide with the component. So it's made for JavaScript developers, but to be fair, there's like 4 or 5 different approaches to solving this problem. You know, there's another one that solves a problem almost the same way, but it's a completely separate module called JS Components, and I've been talking to the maintainer about combining forces.
Interesting.
There's a widgets kind of module suite I think Lullabot put out that does it differently. The Web Components module is very lightweight, but it's part of the I forget that namespace, but it allows you to actually pull in web components from webcomponents.org, so you can pull them in there.
Oh, okay.
And then there's, I want to say there's like 1 or 2 others. So I've been suggesting for a while that we have enough people trying to solve this problem that we should consolidate and look at putting, web component support in core. Oh, and there's Sam Mortensen. Smorty has I don't know if you've seen his single page, his single file components. So
I love that idea, by the way. I wish we had that in core.
It's kind of like Vue or Svelte, where you've got your styles, you've got your JavaScript, and then you've got your Twig, and then it pulls those in as a component.
But it's all in one file. So
all in one file.
I mean, it really lowers the bar for contribution. I feel like I'm just do one file, it's going to add a component, real simple, boom, works. Instead of, with Drupal 8, 9, and eventually 10, this kind of sprawl of files and directories that is the kind of
plugins and libraries and
it's hard to like even navigate the module folders sometimes especially for novices.
And as a programming note here, the post that Nick is talking about was actually from Matteo Bosch from Lullabot.
Nice.
There you go.
Okay.
In the Talking Drupal Slack channel. So
Very cool.
Oh, is that yeah, I was looking at the URL. That's why I got that name from. So
yeah. Well, there's a big space there, and I think we collectively need to come up with some standards around it, because that is the one thing I talk to people a lot about. I don't like to say progressive decoupling, even though it's true.
Yeah.
And Dries, has been talking about that for years and years and years, because people get confused. But the idea of letting Drupal own the glass, render whatever's cacheable, and then putting in web components for things that are like dynamic or that are live or real time. Very, very powerful approach, and not enough people do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of problems to solve on the native web component side, but it brings a lot of power. I'd love to see more of that. So,
speaking of problems to solve,
hey, look at that segue.
Let's talk about our primary topic this week. So we invited you guys on the show to talk about Acquia Code Studio. So Matthew, can you maybe give us the elevator pitch? What is Acquia Code Studio?
Yeah, well, I'll give you the elevator pitch, and then we'll go into the details. So Code Studio, it's a new product that we actually just released at Acquia last month, beginning of March. And it's a complete DevOps platform that we actually built in partnership with GitLab, and tons of features. But among some of the more interesting things are a fully managed CI/CD pipeline, which is optimized for Drupal. And then, of course, there's all of the other tools and features you'd expect with GitLab for planning, testing, reviewing, and then in our case, deploying Drupal applications on Acquia Cloud Platform. Should I go into more detail? There's so much. I'm actually excited about this. So
sure. I am too.
Absolutely.
So just so everyone's aware, Matt can talk about it from like the product director level, and this is kind of like his baby, and I could talk about it from like the developer advocacy level, but I feel like he's got that covered. But what I can do is I can talk about it from the actual user level, because we're rebuilding the Acquia developer portal, and we are using this even in beta. And so there's some really cool stuff we're doing there, and it's made my life a lot better in a lot of ways. So I can speak from experience on that.
So what you're saying is you guys are dog fooding it.
Yeah, we're dog fooding. I was trying to avoid that verb. It's such a strange thing to make into, what is it, a gerund? I think it's drinking our own champagne, which is almost worse in a way, because
there you go.
If you have your own champagne, it's probably not very good. But we're champagning it, or dog fooding it, or just whatever.
Using it.
Maybe give us like the 10,000-foot view of like what's included, like what are the big parts of it, and then I think we'll probably end up going into more details as we go.
I'll start with the coolest part of it. For me at least, which is the way that it's going to work out of the box. You take your Drupal application, whether it's your existing one or a new one, and you push your first commit to Code Studio. Even if you don't have a GitLab CI YAML file, you don't have a build file, right? You've never known or tried to implement CI/CD in your life. It's going to kick off a CI/CD pipeline. It's going to recognize it's a Drupal application. It's going to compose or install to build your dependencies. It's going to PHP code snippet with Drupal coding standards. It'll detect and see if you have PHP unit configuration file. If you do, it'll run those, put the test results in a visual place you can read it. It's going to use PHP stan to check for Drupal deprecations.
Okay.
It's going to, at the end of it, and it does static security testing as well, static application security. So it'll actually see what kinds of files are in your repository. If PHP is there, it'll do PHP SAST. If it sees JS is there, or Go is there, or something else, it'll run different similar static application security tests to check and see if there are any violations there. It'll run Composer Validate to make sure that things look good. We've got a lot of other things in the works, like running our own internal thing called Drupal, which will actually check to see if you're running Drupal best practices. But if it all passes, if it doesn't pass, it'll report to you and tell you why, right? And tell you how to remediate it. But if it does pass, then it constructs it into a build artifact. So with the idea of having like a source repository that doesn't have vendor committed versus an artifact repository that does, it's going to compose or install, with no dev, optimize your autoloader, sanitize your artifact, and then push it to Acquia Cloud for you. And that's all like all you did to trigger that was a git push. And it knows how to do all of that with Drupal. And then of course it's like totally overridable, customizable, extensible, et cetera. So, we kind of start with our default and then let you go from there. And then, sorry, I'm rambling, but one more thing that's really cool. If you open a merge request instead of just a push, right? A slightly different pipeline fires, and we'll actually spin up a new environment for that merge request, copy the database and files into it, deploy the commit to it, clear the caches, do some other automated stuff, and then put a link to that environment in the merge request. So you also get, like the on-demand kind of what GitLab would call a review environment. And there's just so much opportunity for making this even better in the months to come. But what it is right now is really cool.
Yeah, that sounds pretty special. On the security front, is it using something like OWASP to run the security tests, or is it using a different library?
So so it uses some of the standards, the OWASP standards, but it's the library is language dependent, right? So it's going to use a different library to scan PHP than it's going to use to scan Ruby or something like that. But it will detect the violations. It's not just in a log output, it bubbles it up into like a renderable format that's actually in the user interface. So, and then it can categorize it by like critical, moderate, severity, et cetera. And sort of the way that you'd expect something to say, I don't know if you use coveralls, it'll say like, code coverage went down 2%. This merge request fails. Like it'll say, code quality went down 2%. PHPCS threw 5 moderate warnings, or it threw a security thing, which is, Nick, getting back to what you were talking about earlier with like alphabetized CSS. Well, if you're really persnickety, you could have it fail for non-alphabetized CSS, which I would never do, by the way. Good on record for like, that is not a Code Studio feature. Nor should it be, but you're forgetting one of the most important parts though, Matt. Oh, what did I forget? You forgot the automatic code updates and the automatic deprecated code fixes. So I'm gonna get. Oh, you were leading. I'm jumping ahead. I'm jumping ahead. I'm sorry. Those are as someone using it, those are things that I think are pretty cool.
Can you talk a little bit about that, Ron? What kind of automatic updates is it providing? Is it just core updates, contrib updates, security updates? Like how's that work from your perspective?
So I'll tell you from my perspective, and then Matt can tell you what's going on under the hood, because there's some nifty little things that it's doing there that I'm not sure how it's doing it, but it is. So right now, at least my repo is set to do those automatic checks once a week, usually on a Wednesday night after, because Drupal is going to have an update's going to be done then, but it could be more often. So it will do 2 things. One is it's looking for basically a composer update. So if there are any updated, both core as well as any updated modules, and as Matt said, it bubbles that up. So when it automatically creates a merge request with those updates, it tells you specifically, like in this table, this version of this went from here to here, this version went from here to here. Here's some instructions on how to test. Here's that merge request environment where you can go check it out. And then if you want to merge it, great. It does the same thing for the deprecated code scanning. So it will run the PHPCS, and if there's a fix that can apply, then the merge request will actually put that in for you. And if it's not, it will then tell you. And then so you see the output that you'd see on the command line, but it's in the ticket. It shows you that stuff there, which having the robot do the work for me is lovely. I enjoy that immensely.
Yeah. So the way it works is it's a scheduled pipeline. And you can change the schedule and you can do it on demand. But on a schedule, something will spin up a container, run a pipeline that does composer update. And if it finds updates, it will create a merge request for you with the committed change. And because it made a merge request, the other pipeline fires off with a review environment. So you wake up in the morning and like, here's an open merge request with an environment. I can click around. And if I click merge, if I choose, it can go straight to production, because we also have like fully automated CD all the way to the end of the pipeline as an opt-in feature. But the other 2 categories are, one's composer update. That's one kind of scheduled job. We have one that does rector automatically. So we'll go and replace your deprecated code automatically. And the third is, I haven't turned this on yet. It's opt-in only. It's not on by default, but is PHP CBF, the PHP code beautifier, which is paired up with PHP CS. So it'll correct PHP code sniffer mistakes for you automatically, and propose those as improvements via merge request. So it's pretty cool. Go ahead.
Can we go back to the beginning for a second?
Yeah.
In the beginning of time. No. You when you started talking, Matthew, you were talking about how this integrates with GitLab, or you guys have worked with GitLab. Can you clarify that a little bit, and then answer the question of, are we now going to be able to do merge requests within the Acquia dashboard, or is that coming still from like my own private repo and dev environment?
Yeah, very good question. So what we did is we spun up a Kubernetes cluster, and we installed GitLab on that cluster. And GitLab has a community edition, and it also has the ability to add licenses to it. So you can, choose whether it's going to be, the level of GitLab that we install on your behalf. We host it, but then we add a bunch of stuff on top of it. So we add Drupal specific CI/CD. We add a number of UX improvements. We add connections to our SSH servers and our secrets vaults and things like that. We add SSO so that you log into this GitLab instance with your Acquia Cloud account. So it's Acquia's version of GitLab hosted by us and optimized for Drupal. So in an Acquia product, yes, you're creating a merge request, you're managing your code, you're doing your comments, you've got a Kanban board, you've got your CI/CD pipelines, all of these features.
So that's pretty awesome, because I mean, like, unless I completely have missed something, like currently you get a repo, like when you have Acquia Cloud, you get a repo, but typically all your CI/CD stuff is done beforehand and pushed into that repo, and then you kind of like put that code onto as a build artifact, you put it onto whatever environment you want to put it onto. Sounds like it's kind of integrating that a little bit more, making it more like one-stop shopping, right?
Exactly. It's a total paradigm shift. We're introducing like a whole chain of developer tools that we never had before. And this, just to give you a little background on why we built this and why I, started kind of championing internally, like, hey, here's what we should build this year. I started in professional services like 9 years ago at Acquia, and I built big Drupal sites for customers, over and over and over again. And I implemented CI/CD from them over and over again. It was the same process, and I became an expert at it. But even as an expert, I realized it takes me a few weeks at best to start from scratch and build another Drupal optimized CI/CD pipeline for this customer. At the time, that's why I built Acquia BLT. It's Acquia's build and launch tools, which was like my set of tools that I then rolled out across our professional services department to say, here's our standard, here's at least tools that we can use to install and standardize CI/CD. But even so, it was like, all right, maybe you can use BLT on Travis, or now maybe use it on pipelines, use it on GitLab. I wanted to take it further than that, because I've learned a lesson as a product person in recent years, which is I like to build products that are decoupled from the application. I don't want your change in your Drupal application to break your integration with my product. So I wanted a platform instead of an installable package, right? So your code is yours, you put it on the platform, and we can intuit things about your code and run and help you, but you don't have to like upgrade to a certain package version of something that might conflict with another thing in order to get our CI/CD working. And that's a challenge that I ran into with BLT architecturally, simply because it's a package, and it's the same reason you run into that problem with Drush sometimes. It's a hard battle to figure out the balance between what's a system dependency and a platform versus an application dependency. And I think that's a huge difference here. Is it's not just a software package. This is a whole platform with capabilities that we support your application with.
And the other thing, John, is you talked about kind of setting up your own CI/CD and at least deploying the artifact. To be quite honest, that's a step further down the path than a lot of teams and organizations ever get to. And so every time, so before I was here, I led the demo team, and before that, I was in pre-sales as a sales engineer, and before that, I was a developer. And every single time I would talk to either a prospective customer or a current customer, and I'd ask them, most of the time there was always a bit of a sheepish, we know we want to do CI/CD, but we haven't gotten there yet, right? Because it's just, that's an investment that you got to make. So the thing personally for me that I love about this so much is it makes it easier to do the right thing from the beginning, rather than hope that eventually you get there. And so now you're starting off with on the right foot, which makes everything better.
Yeah, I think GitLab, I got really excited about GitLab being the right partner for this when I realized that we can give you a CI/CD build using their auto DevOps feature, and you don't need a build file, because that's always been a pain. Like, we're always telling you, like, well, just paste this into your build file. And if your build fails, like, well, just change this line. Like, actually, you don't even need a build file. You can just use our build file as the service. And that totally like changes what we can do for you. And what I want, and what we have now is like, literally you push code, you get a pipeline that works, you create merge requests, you get a whole pipeline that works. You press merge, it goes all the way building the artifact and pushing it to production. And there's two other cool things to add that we can do to get all the way to production. One is Acquia Cloud Hooks, which actually are going to have a user interface on top of them at the end of this quarter that we're going to call Cloud Actions. But it's like the things that automatically clear your caches, run your DB updates, do your CDN purge, your configuration import, all that stuff that has to happen post code deploy to actually finish the deploy. That's all totally automatable. But also like the tagging process is automatable. So we just rolled out last week a Code Studio feature where like, if you cut a tag in Code Studio and you've opted into this, we'll actually build the tag and then deploy that tag for you to production automatically. So literally the only thing you did was create a tag in a UI and you're done. Like off goes artifacts, tag deployment, cache clear, configuration for everything is like fully automated to the end. And that's the world we're trying to get to.
Do you think people are going to be weirded out by that? Like, hey, I just did this thing in this UI, and now all of a sudden a tag is going out to my production environment. That feels to me
that's why
like
it's opt-in.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
that's fair. That's fair, I guess.
People. But you say that, I thought so. I just talked to a customer last week, and I realized they're already doing this, but without tags. They often do like, hey, we're just going to deploy our master or our something branch, our production branch, because we want a CI/CD system to push to it and have it go live. And we don't know how to automate the tagging process in between. And so we've actually solved that problem. But I get, anecdotally, actually, customers are already doing this, just not as well.
Yeah.
I wish Ron and Matthew were a little bit more excited and were able to really emote and share some of the information with us, because I feel like I'm not really learning a whole lot yet.
You're getting this because I also am one of the engineers on this. Like, not only is it like, am I out here talking about it? Like, I go write the code for this after this. Yes, let's get it working.
I feel like I could say like 2 words and then we can all just go on mute and then it's like winding you up and off you go. But so I'm going to approach this from like a pure developer standpoint. Who, I know a little bit about CI/CD and build scripts and all that stuff, but from a developer standpoint, with GitLab integration, is it safe to assume that, the GitLab issues and that that's all available? So
yes,
as a developer, it seems like the one piece that's missing, and maybe it's not missing, you just haven't got it to it yet. So let's find out. It seems like I can open up a web browser. I can go to my GitLab my Acquia Code Studio GitLab environment. I can make a code change because that's something that GitLab allows.
Yeah.
I can save and commit that file, but then I would have to wait for the build process to run before I could see that. And I don't know how long typical build process is for Acquia Code Studio, but that, in my experience, that could be a few minutes, right?
Yeah,
So
you just like teed up another product for us, which I can pitch to you. No, that's a good question.
But as a developer, when I'm working on my local, I'm used to, I'm going to try this, tap, 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 save, reload the page. Oh, it works. Okay, now I'm going to make the commit.
I have your answer.
Then I'll stop talking.
It is a product that also in one of my teams released last year, or like kind of launched big time last year, was Cloud IDE. So Acquia has a product which I think this is kind of the future of development, period, not just Drupal. And we've seen this with like Microsoft and GitHub and Cloud9 and others, where you open a browser tab and what we show you is an IDE that is running. Yeah, it's a lot like Gitpod, exactly, but it's Drupal optimized. It's running on Acquia platform already. It's connected to your application. It's SSO, but you click one button and it spins up your Drupal database, your files, etc. And that connects to Code Studio. So if you want that live interactive, I'm changing things, I want to hit refresh, I want a visual database browser, I want to run some CLI commands, I got Drush already installed, Composer available, the right PHP versions, APC cache configured correctly, etc. That's Cloud IDE. And you push that up. We actually use a GLab CLI command, so you can do that easily. So like if there's a merge request, you can do GLab, checkout 32 for merge request 32, boom, pulls the whole merge request in, spun up in a Cloud IDE, push it back, the build goes off. So really what, the way we've been thinking about it is like it's 100% cloud-based development. So you don't have to deal with your local machine anymore, because we have a lot of customers that are like federal customers or Windows customers or customers that just don't have access to install things locally. And it just bypasses like a whole world of problems,
So maybe I could just step in real quick and tell you the real world example of how we're doing this and why this whole thing is working so well. So we're rebuilding our developer portal now. We're going to try and do a soft launch before DrupalCon. And I have like no resources, right? As always. So Matt's been helping me do stuff. I've been doing stuff. We started with Acquia CMS. We got Code Studio set up. We have the environment, and we were able to get some time from one of our professional services folks. So we got them started, and they came in. I added them to the subscription. They went in, clicked the button, and they spun up a Cloud IDE instance. So now they're off and ready to go. They didn't have to do Lando or anything on their local DDEV. They were just immediately off to work. They went to pulled the code base down. Now they've got their local environment. They can play and do what they want. They go into Code Studio and are looking for the tickets that I've created. And then they're doing that work. And then every time they do that, they can push to their branch. And whenever they're ready for something to be reviewed, then they create that merge request. I get notification that there's a merge request. I can go look at the ticket and see what's been done. I can see the diff. I can do all that. I can jump over to that on-demand environment, do any testing there. I don't even have to spin up my own Cloud IDE because the system did the thing for me. When I'm ready to go, I push the merge and it runs through the rest of the pipeline. I turn around and walk away and it does its thing. The other cool thing that's really lovely that we discovered and I've been using is there's a really awesome module that's not Code Studio specific, but it's called Config Patch GitLab API. And what this does is this allows you to connect Drupal to a GitLab instance, either out in the world or Code Studio. And it gives you a UI where it will compare the configuration you have on file versus the configuration on the database. You have a list of checklists of the things that are different, updated, deleted, created. You check the ones you want, you put in a message and click a button, and it creates a merge request for you. So some of the merge requests that are being done are code things that the developer's doing. Some of the merge request things are config things that they're using this patch for. And the beautiful thing is that now I can go in, I can take a look at those things, pull them in, and because we are using those cloud hooks, when I'm ready to go and I actually do the deployment to prod, it's going to actually not only push out the code and do all the cache clearing and stuff, it's going to actually import the config as well. So
this is just automated. Honestly, this is the best improvement to configuration management that I've seen in like the last 5 or 6 years. When Ron found this model, I installed, like, you go in production and someone has made a change and you're like, crap, I got to export it so I don't wipe it out when I deploy next. instead of like pulling a database down and running drush export and like committing it and pushing it back up, which is usually what I do, you just hit a button in the prod UI and boom, like merge request is open with the diff, hit merge, done. Like it's exporting the config diff directly to a merge request, which just makes it such a nice developer workflow for getting config back out of production into the development workflow.
And then to make it even better, it relies on the good stuff that GitLab already has. So we had a stand up this morning and we were looking at one of the tickets and I was like, I thought that work was done. And he was like, yeah, the merge request is over here. You open up the merge request and at the bottom, the button for merge is grayed out because we had done other stuff and GitLab detected that there was a conflict, a merge conflict that needed to be done. So he was like, oh, yeah, I can go fix that in just a few minutes. So it stopped me from doing something wrong. And it told me that there was that conflict. He was able to go fix it. And then I pushed the button and we got all the good stuff out. It's just so much faster.
So question on prod config, right? You said that there is a button that you need to push in order for that to happen. Is that something that could happen automatically? Like,
yes, we're talking about that right now.
Okay, cool.
So
sounds dangerous.
I forked it.
Though.
Like I forked it.
Well, no, if it makes a merge request, it's not
command
dangerous, right? So I remember talking to Chris Wells a while back about kind of that workflow of like, hey, if a client makes a change on prod, right, like that needs to kind of get back into whatever your repository of choice is, and you know, obviously there are modules out there to prevent people from like making config changes on prod that you might blow away. But sometimes that feels a little restrictive. So yeah, having that be an automatic thing where it just opens up a merge request and goes, hey, the client made a change. Here it is. Like, is this okay?
So it's interesting you mentioned that, John, because I've also seen the modules that restrict config on prod. And I felt the same way. I'm like, it just feels like that's what permissions is for. Don't put me in a straitjacket. But now that this workflow is so much easier, I'm actually seriously considering it because it's not going to be a huge pain for me to do something quick. And then what we've actually talked about, and of course, as I mentioned, Matt is, has a coding addiction. He's actually already forked this module and put stuff in. So one of the things we're talking about with Martin, actually, who was here a couple weeks ago doing the Smart Date module, was actually even just going in and as part of our workflow, defining that, like, let's say that stage is going to be the place where we're going to focus on doing all of our config stuff. Let's set a cron job. And at the end of every day, let's just, any changes that were made, if there were any, let's just go ahead and create a merge request. We come into our stand up in the morning and we can go ahead and review that and say, okay, we can either blow that away because we're not done, or we want to go in and create a new merge request and cherry pick the config things. But then you're always kind of like getting to that deploying as often as possible kind of state you want to be in. And this just makes it easier to do it.
I mean, it also solves the gnarly problem of things that are both config and content, like web forms.
Yeah.
I mean, like clients many times will have somebody who's sophisticated enough content editor to create web forms. But as a developer, that's a nightmare because then you're either just ignoring web form config or you're constantly risking blowing it away.
Yeah.
It also allows you to use those modules that kind of lock down config for bad clients that update things irresponsibly in config. Like, listen, I got your merge request. That's ridiculous. Now you can't access that config page anymore.
So before I ask my next question, I do want to clarify one thing that I think you said, but it wasn't explicit to me. So right now, for example, Acquia in general, they have their own repo behind the scenes, but a lot of clients that use Acquia will use their own GitLab or their own GitHub or their own Bitbucket or something else, right? And then just have a second origin or remote rather. If you're using Acquia Code Studio, are you required to use the GitLab instance, or is there, repo mirroring that you can set up so you could still like do pull requests and get GitHub, for example, and get that portion? Now, obviously, you're probably not going to get the, the automated merge request created from config. But I'm curious, like, are you required to use the Acquia Studio?
So mirroring's an option that's built in. Like you can mirror with a repository that's hosted elsewhere. I wouldn't do it though, like because a lot of the value that I'm talking about is like we took care of CI/CD for you, and if you're doing your merge request somewhere else, then you're not going to get the value of that. You know, you could theoretically have two things. You have GitHub, and then once you're done, you push over into us, and we run it. But then you also lost the value of getting the pipeline run when the changes is introduced or proposed. And like this is GitLab uses a term that I really like called shift left, which is like we're going to take these, like if there's a process starting from left to right with development, like we want to take that automation and shift it left as far as we can. So I want that automation to happen as early as possible in your dev process. You know, on your local machine, when you make the commit, I want your Git hooks to test it before it gets to GitLab. Once it gets to GitLab, I want to run that automation right away before you even introduce your merge request and when you introduce your merge request, et cetera. So kind of delaying automation until the last step is just like, it's not how I would choose to structure a project. I don't think it's the best way to structure, but you can do it. Yeah.
To the next point, yes. I mean, if you've already got your own stuff set up and you want to do that, if you want to set up Travis CI, or if you have this other thing you want to do and you want to own that whole process, there's no problem. This isn't something that's forced on you. But again, the concept here is to make it as easy as falling off a log, right? It should be so simple to do it, and it should do so much for you that not using it should actually be a bit of a painful decision. It's like, why wouldn't I do that? It's the real question. But yes, you absolutely can. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the questions that I had then is testing. Because so I see how CI/CD is automated kind of with some of the features that GitLab has. But when I went through the tour, it also mentioned that PHP tests and that kind of stuff kind of run out of the box magically. As a developer, I'm extremely suspicious of magical tests. So I'm curious, when you say testing happens automatically, are you talking about kind of that default, Drupal test suites and default security testing and linting and PHP stand, or are there some functional tests that you're running to somehow magically behind the scenes too, or are you writing your own tests?
We got to split it up. We're not going to write custom tests for your application, obviously, because we don't know what your application is built to do that is custom. So how could we test it? We do know it's Drupal though. And so there's a bunch of stuff we can do to make sure you're running Drupal right. And yes, that includes PHP stand, PHP CS, and static application security testing, composer validation, et cetera. But we also know that since it's Drupal, you're probably using PHP unit. So, although we won't write your PHP unit test, we'll run it for you. So we'll look to see, do you have a PHP unit XML file? And if you do, of course, that defines where your tests are and what suites are available and such. And we'll just run it. We'll run your PHP unit config file that you've configured. And we're going to do the same thing for PHP CS to give you the ability to customize and change which rules, for instance, you'd like to ignore or whatever. And the same thing for PHP stand. They have it's a really weird, it's PHP stand.neon, I think it's a file extension. But anyway, it's a configuration file to do the same thing. So that's how we're like doing a balance. Like we'll run everything for you and we have defaults, but if you define something yourself, we'll just go to that and run it.
So that actually makes me think, and I'm going to ask this question, I think in reverse, because we're talking about testing. Do like DevOps engineers have the ability to kind of bring in their own testing tools into the process? So like, for example, if you're using like SonarQube to kind of run some specific tests, can you integrate that into kind of the pipeline process? And more so, like if you have other specific development tools that you want to use, can those be integrated?
Yeah. So so I mentioned before how excited I was when I realized that GitLab had auto DevOps. One of the really cool features of auto DevOps is inheritance. So, or like including. So you can include our DevOps. You can make a custom build file, and we show snippets of how to do this on the doc site. Include our auto DevOps build, but then override any part of it that you want because you define it after the
Oh,
include.
that's great.
And so you can do it in a few ways. One, you could totally just override our test stage and make your own. Or for every single job that runs in our test stage or any other stage, you could define a before script or after script as well. So you can tag on to the beginning or end of anything. Additionally, if you want to be like less invasive and kind of, you know, tweak it as little as possible in order to make it easy to stay as things change, we have a ton of CI/CD variables that we've made available so that you can change, you know, directory path standards, toggleable things on and off, etc. So I'm trying to create like a lot of levels of customization depending on how advanced you want to be. So yeah, you can bring SonarQube. Actually, SonarQube always comes up. That's like always one of the questions people ask, and they must be doing very well lately.
So
but sure,
I guess I have a follow-up for Ron from like a user standpoint. Have you integrated with any like outside services like SonarQube or any of the other ones?
Not yet. I haven't needed to yet. Like I said, this project that I'm working on is relatively new. We just got a backend developer 4 weeks ago. So we're like moving like ridiculously fast. So I have not really had time to breathe, but everything so far has been great. And in fact, as Matt talked about earlier, that idea of deploying directly to prod, probably using a tag or a specific branch or something. When I started this project was kind of like a faraway dream. And now I'm seriously considering moving into that realm. So I think getting to the place where we might want to start integrating with some external services is more feasible now than I would have thought, you know, a month ago, because now I've got the brain space because the robot's doing so much for me. It's now I can actually look at, okay, what more can it do?
It's because you trust it now, Ron. You didn't trust it to deploy to prod before, and now that you've had like a month of
it's
using
true.
it, you're like, you know what? Maybe it can just do that.
I do trust it. And it's a cute little robot. It's good.
This is how Skynet forms.
Yeah,
a little bit
we're
of
doing
trust.
That's right. The Lord's work here, trying to bring the
That's
robot
right.
overlords.
Thinking of it as iRobot myself at the end of iRobot,
Thank you.
not the beginning.
Yeah.
So can I know you guys have more questions. We have 15 minutes left. I have one thing I want to try to talk about just to blow your minds here, to talk about the hardest problem that we've had to solve in this, that we haven't quite solved yet, but I'm going to throw a wrinkle in that no one's thought about with this config stuff, right? And I talked to Mike Madison. You all might know him. He's probably been on the podcast. So think about this scenario. If we introduce an automatic update and, you know, we do a merge request with a composer change and deploy that to an environment for you, sometimes you have to run db update or updb, and then it changes the configuration. And that configuration change should be exported and not on disk, right? And so you don't know how to deploy it. And I don't know if you guys have run into this. It's like a chicken or egg. Like first I deploy the code, then I run up DB, then I deploy it again with the updated config. So for the dev portal, Ron, you don't even know. I've already implemented this, and I'm going to make this.
This is why you want Matt on your projects, everybody, because he just fixes things while you're sleeping. He is the robot behind the robot. So sorry.
I'm gonna publish how I accomplished this so people can copy and paste it and use it. That'll be on the dev portal as like a tutorial, as a custom cloud hook, but it's going to be one of the cloud actions we release next quarter. So what we do is we make an automatic update, we compose our update for you, submit a merge request, spin up an environment, deploy it. Then we run cache clear, updb, cache clear again on the environment, and then we drush export, but we do it through the config patch module. So we export the diff back to the merge request where the composer diff is. And then we redeploy it back through the pipeline again to the continuous delivery environment. So you end up with one merge request with the exported config and the composer update and an environment where both have already been applied, so that then you can deploy that to production, which took me, I had to make some flowcharts to figure out how to get that to work and not break. But that's typically an unsolved problem.
That's astounding. That's astounding. I mean, you definitely have to have some. I mean, most people should be on. If they're on Drupal 9, they should be past this by now. But people upgrading from Drupal 7 to Drupal 9, or actually no, nobody's even doing that without a rebuild. You have to have a warning about the 9.3 update, because anybody getting a merge request with an update through 9.3 is going to see 50,000 files changed and think that something went wrong. So you're definitely going to have a frequently asked questions for that edge case. But other than that, I mean, that's the dream.
So I have a question. So that process is great for like updating a module, right? That process could also be great for removing a module, right? Because essentially with a composer-based workflow, you have to do
you still can't do that in a single pull request, because you can't remove the module until it's been uninstalled in the database.
Right, but I mean, could that workflow be adapted to work in that way as well? Like where like, hey, I have to uninstall a module, export the config with the uninstalled module, and then go remove it from Composer, and now I have like two commits that are basically, all related.
Drush and environment variables could do it.
I'm surprised Matt is not at his whiteboard already.
Yeah,
I think he's actually tuned us out and started coding.
That's probably accurate at this point.
He's not here right now.
You would have to have a pre-deployment hook that checks to see if a remove module is installed to uninstall it before the Composer build happens. Because if you have the uninstall and remove on the same push on an environment where the module exists, it will break. Period.
This is only a problem that's worth solving if you actually have a use case for automated module removal.
Yeah.
Like, because otherwise, if you're doing it manually, you're already in an environment where Drupal's bootstrapped, and so there's no need for it.
The problem that I've seen most often this happen with is, there's two cases where I see this becoming a problem. One is when you have a multi-environment set up and you end up merging in something from upstream that already had removed the module and removed it from Composer. So you end up breaking something that's downstream. The other place that I see this happen is going from Drupal 8 to Drupal 9, because many times you have to remove a module there and you forget to. I've seen many developers do that. They like work through it, they fix it, they have an environment that's working, they push it up and they forget, I didn't uninstall before that are removed.
Right.
Oh, actually, I know how to solve this. Okay, so sorry. You can see, it just goes. So one of the cool things we're doing with Cloud Actions is we have both pre-deploy and post-deploy steps, just like you were saying, Nick. Because some things you want to do, like back up your databases before you actually change your code tag. And so if you utilize that and you do the disable prior to the deploy and then the code deploy, then you don't run into a problem. So how do I make that into a feature?
I mean, honestly, as a developer, I would say what I would want is if you try deploying it to an environment that has a module enabled that is removing it from Composer, it would just block that, period.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't want it automatically running some Drush command to uninstall a module. That's the kind of thing where this should stop the deployment and throw a warning and say, hey, you're trying to deploy something that removes
it's going to hurt you in some way.
Yeah, exactly. I would, as a developer, but then again, I'm sure there's a lot of people that would want the unsafe one that, hey, just run the Drush uninstall command and.
But that's like a whole category of features I hadn't thought of before, like deployment blockers as a cloud hook.
Yeah.
Where we do sanity checks and then abort the deploy if it doesn't get met. That's a great idea. We're going to do that.
You can feel free to include all of us in the
you can credit
the attribution of that feature.
Yeah, touch Drupal and Drupal easy.
I don't.
I'll take it. We are coming up on time, so we got a couple more questions left.
I'll go. Mine's real quick.
Oh, sure.
Oh, did you have one? I'm sorry.
No, go for it. You're up.
Yeah, so real quick. So is this Code Studio, is this something that all Acquia Cloud customers get, or is this like an additional tier, or how does that work?
Excellent question. You want to answer it, Matt? You want me to?
I'm going to let you. It's so businessy, Ron. I'm going to let you.
Oh, man, I don't want to be the businessy person.
And just to sum it up for you guys, what we want to know is how much is this magic going to cost us?
So correct me if I'm wrong here, Matt, but I believe, so this is a separate thing, right? It's a separate feature that you can get. Right now, it is a separate thing, so you have to add the license to your subscription. By the end of the year, when it is GA, and by that we mean it's available in all regions and it's available for FedRAMP customers, which it currently is available to, but it isn't FedRAMP compliant. So right now it's in limited availability. Everybody's going to get a seat as part of their subscription out of the box. So everyone's going to have it kind of like we do with Cloud IDE. And then some of the higher tiers, I believe, are going to have more seats. And that's where I'm kind of fuzzy.
Yeah, I mean, just to like justify it a little bit, like I would love to give this to free for everybody as much as they wanted. There's two like cost drivers for us. Like we are spinning up clusters to host dedicated GitLab instances. So yeah, it's hard to do that for free with too many people because it costs money. And the other is licenses. So, you know, in 3/4 of the situations, you're going to want a premium or an ultimate or some kind of GitLab license. And like, we have to pay GitLab for the license. So you need to pay us so that we cover.
Which we want to pay GitLab, right? Like we want to make sure that they're getting supported as well. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's not like free to us to give it to you. That's the problem. But we do give you one free Cloud IDE right now, and by the end of the year, we will give everyone one free Code Studio seat, so everyone can like try it out, and for a small team, so that you can get all the value out of it. Yeah.
Okay, and so it sounds like by the end of the year, this will be available to any existing customer in Acquia, and for now, you have to be in a right region, and you can't be FedRAMP. But
anyone
it's really available now.
Yeah.
You could be
the only limitation would be on the customer's choice, not on our choice.
Oh, okay.
Right. Like if somebody's like, no, I want that to be in APJ, and right now it's just in North America. Well, okay. Or a FedRAMP customer could use it, but they would have to know that part of the workflow was not under FedRAMP yet, and they would have to be comfortable making that exception, which I personally would be, but they may not. So. When we say limited availability in this case, it's not limited like not everybody can get it because anybody can that's a customer. It's limited from there's some caveats where you might choose not to because of region, because of FedRAMP, but
it's about your requirements. Maybe it doesn't meet your requirements. Yeah.
Very good.
So one other sticky question here as far as local development goes and local environments, right? So I'm a lover of Lando, but I'm wondering if I'm using Acquia Code Studio, is there a way for me? Obviously, I'm pulling my repo locally. I might have a .lando file in there. Is there a way for me to run my build locally to see if it's going to work, run my tests that are part of my, my build steps to make sure that those are going to work? And if so, is there a specific local environment I need to use for that? Or is it, maybe on the roadmap?
Yeah. I did it once. I mean, like you can do it. I don't know that. So it's really a GitLab feature. There's a blog post, which I can also add in here for people who are interested in this podcast, that walks you through how really for any GitLab CI/CD, how you can register your local machine as a runner. And then when you fire off a job on GitLab, or I think you can use the CLI too, it uses a Docker container running on your computer to do the build, which means you can modify the code and step into it and SSH into the container and poke around in a way that you couldn't if it were on there.
GitLab has the coolest features.
I know, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of nuts. Like I couldn't believe it. I was doing it while I was doing it. I was like, this seems really complicated, and I'm not usually like this deep into containers. But I followed the tutorial and it showed me how to, and it's how some of our engineers have done this. So it's definitely possible. I would call it advanced. But it's a feature.
Yeah,
good to know.
I just want to leave you guys with one thing. Sorry, I know under the wire. I've been waiting for a good time, but our demo team has actually put together some really cool clickable demos that are available on the website. So if you want to see what it looks like, and it's not a full-fledged environment, but you want to kind of click through and see what the stuff we've been talking about looks like, how the UI, click the buttons and do all of that. there's a limited clickable demo on the website that you guys can hit.
Thank you for joining us, Ron and Matthew. This has been a great episode, and we really appreciate you letting us know about Acquia Code Studio. It's definitely, I got to say, I feel like you need a different name, maybe. I mean, it's way cooler than the name implies. It's definitely one of the cooler things cooler integrations with Acquia and GitLab that I've definitely heard about. So for our listeners, if you have any questions or feedback about what you heard today, you can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal. You can also email us at show@talkingdrupal.com, and you can connect with the hosts and other listeners on the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel. If you're interested in show news, upcoming Drupal camps, local meetups, Chad's Book Corner, and Abby's bi-weekly game review, you can sign up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
You too can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
Our patrons help keep this show running. We'd like to thank Mike, Aaron, Robert, Greg, Hawkeye, Patrick, Mark, Jacob, James, John, Philip, Nick, Peter, and Stephen. You can learn more about becoming a patron on talkingdrupal.com and choose Become a Patron. Well, we've come to the end of the show. And Matthew, if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to do that?
Grasmash on Twitter, on Drupal.org. Hit me up. GRASMASH.
And Ron, if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you?
RL Northcutt, NORTHCUTT in all the places.
And Mike, how about you?
Ultimike, and may I suggest for a new name, Acquia Code Studio.
Ooh.
Okay. Now,
Great
if
name.
you want to know that, you're going to have to listen to the outtake stuff. But there you go. A plug for the Patreons.
And John, if listeners want to get in touch with you?
Find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi, and you can find out about EPAM at EPAM.com.
And listeners can find me at Nixvan, NICXVAN, pretty much everywhere.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.